You thought you knew Harry Potter. You thought it was just a story about magic, friendship, and courage. But what if I told you, hidden beneath the spells and adventures lies a psychological journey, deeper, darker, and far more personal than you ever imagined? Through the eyes of Carl Jung, Harry's true battle is revealed, a confrontation with the shadows of his own soul. This is the Harry Potter story you were never meant to see. Get ready. Once you open this door, there's no turning back. Harry Potter's journey begins not with a letter from Hogwarts, but with a call from the depths of his unconscious. Living in the cupboard under the stairs, Harry exists in what Jung would call a state of psychological imprisonment, cut off from his true nature and potential. This cramped space symbolizes the confinement of his authentic self, forced into darkness by the oppressive Dursley family who represent the collective shadow of conformity and denial. The strange occurrences around young Harry, the vanishing glass at the zoo, his mysteriously regrown hair, are what Jung would identify as eruptions from the unconscious, psychic energy demanding recognition. These magical incidents represent the self-archetype attempting to break through the ego's defenses, signaling that Harry's conscious identity is incomplete and disconnected from his wholeness. When Hagrid bursts through the door on that stormy night, he serves as the archetypal herald, delivering the call to adventure that Joseph Campbell, building on Jung's work, identified as the first stage of the hero's journey. "You're a wizard, Harry" is more than information. It's an invitation to psychological awakening, to reclaim disowned aspects of his psyche that have been relegated to the unconscious. The lightning bolt scar on Harry's forehead is a powerful symbol of wounded consciousness. In Jungian terms, this mark represents both trauma and initiation, the wound that becomes the opening. Located on his forehead, seat of the third eye in many spiritual traditions, it suggests heightened perception and the painful gift of seeing beyond ordinary reality into the realm of the collective unconscious. Harry's orphan status places him in a lineage of mythological heroes who must forge their identity without parental guidance. This absence creates what Jung called a parental complex, a psychological vacuum that becomes filled with projected archetypal content. Without personal parents, Harry's psyche naturally gravitates toward archetypal parent figures, explaining his deep connection to surrogate fathers like Dumbledore and Sirius. The mirror of Erised represents Jung's concept of projection, the unconscious tendency to see aspects of our inner world reflected in the outer world. Harry sees his parents, revealing his deepest longing for wholeness and connection to his origins. Dumbledore's warning that men have wasted away before the mirror echoes Jung's caution about becoming lost in unconscious fantasies rather than integrating them into conscious life. Platform 9 3/4 symbolizes the threshold between ordinary consciousness, the Muggle world, and the magical realm of the unconscious. The solid barrier that must be passed through represents the ego's resistance to the unknown. Harry's leap of faith, running straight at what appears to be a solid wall, demonstrates the courage required to surrender rational certainty and enter the realm of the psyche's deeper mysteries. The Sorting Hat's placement of Harry in Gryffindor rather than Slytherin represents a crucial moment of conscious choice in his individuation process. Jung emphasized that while we cannot choose what exists in our unconscious, we can choose which aspects we develop and integrate. Harry's declaration, "Not Slytherin," is his ego making a decisive stand about which archetypal energies he will consciously align with. Harry's discovery of the wand with the phoenix feather core connects him to the archetype of rebirth and transformation. The phoenix, dying and rising from its ashes, symbolizes the psychological death and renewal central to Jung's concept of individuation. That this wand shares a core with Voldemort's foreshadows their psychological connection. They represent two potential paths of the same psychic energy. As Harry boards the Hogwarts Express, he crosses the first major threshold of his individuation journey. The train itself symbolizes the movement of psychic energy from one state of consciousness to another. His compartment companions, Ron and Hermione, will become aspects of his psyche externalized. Ron embodying instinct and emotional loyalty, Hermione representing intellect and wisdom. Together, they form a psychological trinity necessary for Harry's wholeness. Voldemort emerges as the quintessential Jungian shadow, the repository of all Harry refuses to acknowledge in himself. As Jung wrote, "Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is." Voldemort's very name, flight from death, reveals his nature as the embodiment of the fear of mortality and finitude that lurks in Harry's unconscious. The connection between Harry and Voldemort, their shared wand cores, Harry's ability to speak Parseltongue, their mental link, illustrates Jung's understanding that the shadow is not separate from us but intimately connected to our psyche. Their connection is not coincidental but necessary. Voldemort represents the disowned aspects of Harry that must be recognized and integrated rather than merely conquered. Professor Quirrell's dual nature, housing Voldemort on the back of his head, symbolizes the shadow's tendency to hide behind the persona. Jung described the persona as the social mask we present to the world, while the shadow lurks behind it. Quirrell's stuttering, seemingly harmless demeanor conceals the malevolent force that shares his consciousness, just as our social presentations often hide our darker impulses. The Mirror of Erased returns as a psychological testing ground when Harry confronts Quirrell's Voldemort. That Harry can retrieve the Philosopher's Stone because he wants to find it, but not use it, demonstrates Jung's principle that consciousness must recognize the shadow without being consumed by it. Harry acknowledges the power, the stone, without being seduced by its promise of unlimited life and wealth. Harry's confrontation with the basilisk in the Chamber of Secrets represents his deepening encounter with the collective shadow. The basilisk, hidden beneath the school for centuries, symbolizes repressed collective content that has grown monstrous through neglect. Its killing gaze represents how direct confrontation with unconscious content can overwhelm consciousness unless approached indirectly, as Harry does using the mirror. Tom Riddle's diary illustrates the shadow's attempt to possess consciousness through fascination. Jung warned that unconscious content often appears seductive, drawing us into identification with it. Ginny's possession by the diary shows how the unintegrated shadow can take control when consciousness is vulnerable. Harry's destruction of the diary with the basilisk fang represents using the shadow's own energy to free oneself from its grip. The Dementors embody what Jung called the affect, overwhelming emotional states that drain consciousness of its energy and coherence. Their ability to suck out souls parallels the psychic experience of depression and despair, where meaning and vitality are leached from experience. Harry's difficulty with the Patronus charm initially stems from his inability to access positive psychic content powerful enough to counter these negative states. Sirius Black's transformation from perceived threat to ally demonstrates the shadow's potential for redemption. Initially presented as a murderer hunting Harry, Sirius is revealed to be a godfather and protector. This reversal illustrates Jung's teaching that shadow content, when properly understood and integrated, contains valuable energy and resources for the psyche rather than merely threatening it. The revelation that Peter Pettigrew, not Sirius, betrayed Harry's parents represents the shadow's capacity for deception. Appearing as Ron's pet rat for years, Pettigrew symbolizes how the shadow often hides in plain sight, disguised as something harmless or even helpful. His animal form as a rat connects him to the underground, the traditional symbolic domain of the unconscious and its hidden contents. Harry's mastery of the Patronus charm marks a crucial development in his relationship with the shadow. By accessing his deepest positive memories and emotions, Harry demonstrates Jung's principle that integration of the shadow requires the mobilization of the self's resources. The stag form of his Patronus connects him to his father, suggesting that positive ancestral energy from the collective unconscious can be accessed to confront personal and collective shadow material. Harry's evolving relationships with female characters reveal his developing relationship with his anima, Jung's term for the feminine aspect of the male psyche. His initial awkwardness with Cho Chang represents the adolescent's first conscious encounter with projected anima material. His attraction to her is not merely romantic, but psychological. She embodies qualities of emotional sensitivity and intuition that Harry's masculine consciousness needs to integrate. Hermione functions as what Jung would call a positive anima figure, representing wisdom, intuition, and emotional intelligence that complement Harry's more action-oriented approach. Their non-romantic but deeply intimate friendship allows Harry to integrate anima qualities without the complications of sexual projection. Through Hermione, Harry learns to value knowledge, planning, and emotional awareness as essential to his wholeness. Luna Lovegood embodies the mystical, intuitive dimension of the anima. Her ability to see thestrals and believe in unseen creatures represents access to unconscious content that rational consciousness, represented by Hermione, often rejects. Luna's acceptance of Harry just as he is offers him unconditional positive regard that helps heal his wounded sense of self and opens him to the numinous dimensions of experience. Ginny Weasley's evolution from shy admirer to powerful witch in her own right tracks the maturation of Harry's anima from projection to recognition of the other as a separate self. Their eventual partnership represents what Jung would call a more individuated relationship, one based not on projection, but on the recognition of the other's autonomy and strength. Ginny's fiery nature complements Harry's more contained personality. Professor McGonagall serves as an anima figure associated with the archetype of the wise old woman. Her strict exterior conceals deep care and wisdom, teaching Harry that feminine strength includes boundaries and discipline. Her animagus form as a cat connects her to intuition and independence, qualities Harry needs to develop in himself to achieve psychological wholeness. Ron Weasley functions as Harry's emotional barometer, expressing feelings that Harry often suppresses. In Jungian terms, Ron represents aspects of Harry's feeling function that have been externalized. Their conflicts, particularly during the Triwizard Tournament and the Horcrux Hunt, represent Harry's internal struggle to integrate emotional awareness with his dominant functions of intuition and thinking. Dumbledore embodies the wise old man archetype, representing Harry's higher self, or what Jung called the archetype of meaning. His guidance is not merely practical but spiritual, helping Harry understand the deeper significance of his experiences. Dumbledore's revelation of his own flaws and past mistakes shows the integration of shadow material that Harry must achieve to become whole. Snape represents the complexity of the shadow that cannot be simply categorized as good or evil. His apparent cruelty conceals deep love and sacrifice, demonstrating Jung's principle that the shadow often contains our greatest gifts in disguised form. Snape's memories in the Pensieve reveal how projection and unhealed wounds can distort perception across generations. Harry's father's shadow became Snape's burden, which was then projected onto Harry. The Mirror of Erised returns symbolically throughout the series as Harry encounters various reflections of himself, in prophecies, in others' memories, in the Pensieve. These reflections represent the ego's encounter with the self, the totality of the psyche that includes both conscious and unconscious elements. Harry's growing ability to integrate these reflections marks his progress toward what Jung called individuation. The Triwizard Tournament serves as an individuation ritual, forcing Harry to separate from his social group and face challenges alone. Jung emphasized that individuation requires periods of separation from collective identity. Each task, facing dragons, rescuing loved ones from the depths, navigating a maze, represents archetypal challenges that must be overcome in the individuation process, culminating in Harry's confrontation with death itself. The graveyard scene where Voldemort regains his body represents what Jung called a night sea journey, a descent into darkness and death that precedes rebirth. Cedric's death marks the end of Harry's psychological innocence, forcing him to confront mortality not as an abstract concept, but as an immediate reality. The ritual using Harry's blood creates what Jung would call a participation mystique, a primitive psychological connection between Harry and Voldemort that transcends physical separation. The Department of Mysteries, with its various chambers containing time, thought, love, death, and prophecy, symbolizes the collective unconscious with its archetypal contents. The locked room of love that cannot be breached represents what Jung called the transcendent function, the mysterious process by which opposites are united in the psyche. Harry's drawn to this place because it contains the deeper meaning of his psychological journey. The prophecy linking Harry and Voldemort illustrates Jung's concept of synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that cannot be explained by cause and effect. That either must die at the hand of the other represents the psychological principle that integration of the shadow requires a kind of ego death. The conscious personality must surrender its dominance for the greater wholeness of the self to emerge. Sirius's death through the veil in the Department of Mysteries symbolizes the threshold between conscious and unconscious existence. The veil itself represents what Jung called the transcendent function, the symbolic bridge between conscious and unconscious content. Harry's inability to accept Sirius's passage reflects the ego's natural resistance to surrendering control to the deeper processes of the psyche. Dumbledore's explanation that Harry's power is love reflects Jung's understanding that the integration of opposites, in this case the opposition between Harry and Voldemort, requires what he called the transcendent function, often experienced as unconditional love or acceptance. This is not sentimental emotion, but the profound recognition of interconnection that transcends ego boundaries. The Half-Blood Prince's Potions book represents inherited collective knowledge that has been forgotten or suppressed. Jung emphasized that the collective unconscious contains wisdom accumulated across generations. Harry's use of this knowledge without understanding its source or context leads to unintended consequences, showing the danger of accessing unconscious content without conscious discernment. The Horcruxes embody Jung's concept of psychic fragmentation. Voldemort's splitting of his soul represents the extreme of disintegration, the opposite of the individuation process that Harry is undergoing. Each Horcrux contains shadow material that must be recognized and reintegrated for wholeness to be restored, not just for Voldemort, but for the collective psyche represented by the wizarding world. The Deathly Hallows represent archetypal power objects that test the ego's relationship to power, immortality, and death. The Elder Wand power, the Resurrection Stone, transcendence of death, and the Invisibility Cloak, concealment protection, correspond to fundamental human desires that Jung identified as often driving unconscious behavior. Harry's eventual mastery over these objects comes through surrender rather than possession, a key principle in Jungian individuation. Harry's willing walk to his death in the Forbidden Forest represents the ego's surrender to the self, what Jung called the necessary sacrifice of the ego's dominance for individuation to occur. That Harry does not resist or fight but consciously chooses this path demonstrates the mature ego's recognition that it is not the center of the psyche but in service to something larger. Harry's conversation with Dumbledore in the liminal King's Cross space represents what Jung called active imagination, conscious dialogue with unconscious content. This space, neither life nor death, symbolizes the transcendent function where opposites meet and new consciousness emerges. Harry's choice to return rather than go on represents the return of transformed consciousness to engage with life, completing the hero's journey. Harry's apparent death and resurrection completes the archetypal death-rebirth cycle, central to Jung's understanding of individuation. His willingness to die transforms his relationship with death itself, no longer something to be feared, as Voldemort fears it, but accepted as part of the wholeness of experience. This acceptance gives Harry power over the Master of Death archetype without his having sought it. Neville's emergence as a hero in Harry's absence represents the activation of latent potential in the collective psyche. Jung noted that when one individual undergoes transformation, it creates resonant change in the collective. Neville, who might have been the chosen one according to the prophecy, embodies the principle that the hero archetype can manifest through multiple individuals in a community undergoing transformation. The final confrontation between Harry and Voldemort occurs in the Great Hall before witnesses, symbolizing that the integration of shadow material must ultimately be witnessed and recognized by the community. Jung emphasized that individuation is not just a private process, but has collective implications. Harry's public victory represents the collective recognition of transformed consciousness. Harry's explanation to Voldemort about the Elder Wand's true allegiance demonstrates his integrated understanding of power. Rather than seeking to possess power, Voldemort's approach, Harry has learned that true power comes through relationship, choice, and sacrifice. This represents Jung's principle that the individuated self relates to power not through domination, but through ethical responsibility. The breaking of the Elder Wand in the film version, or its return to Dumbledore's tomb in the book, represents Harry's transcendence of the power complex. Jung observed that individuation requires relinquishing inflation, the ego's identification with archetypal power. By choosing not to keep the most powerful wand in existence, Harry demonstrates that he has integrated its meaning without being possessed by its energy. The epilogue showing Harry as a father 19 years later represents the completion of the individuation cycle and the beginning of generational transmission. Jung noted that the individuated person becomes a vessel for transmitting transformed consciousness to future generations. Harry's reassurance to his son Albus Severus about Slytherin House shows his integration of the shadow. What was once feared is now recognized as a valid aspect of the whole. The naming of Harry's children after those who shaped his journey, James Sirius, Albus Severus, Lily Luna, represents the integration of various archetypal influences into a coherent narrative. Jung emphasized that naming has psychological power, connecting us to ancestral and archetypal energies. These names create a bridge between past and future, honoring both light and shadow figures in Harry's development. Harry's scar no longer hurting indicates the healing of the original wound that initiated his journey. Jung observed that psychological wounds often become openings for greater consciousness. The painless scar represents integrated trauma, not erased or forgotten, but transformed into wisdom that no longer causes suffering. The wound has become a scar, marking experience without continuing to generate pain. The circular nature of Harry's journey, beginning and ending at King's Cross, reflects Jung's understanding of the psyche's movement as spiral rather than linear. Harry returns to where he started, but with transformed consciousness. The platform 9 3/4 that once represented his entry into the magical world now symbolizes his role in guiding the next generation across the threshold between ordinary and extraordinary consciousness. The enduring popularity of Harry Potter represents what Jung would call resonance with the collective unconscious. Stories that capture the imagination of millions tap into archetypal patterns that speak to shared human experience. Harry's journey from wounded orphan to integrated adult, from unconscious reactor to conscious creator of his destiny, mirrors the individuation journey that all humans are invited to undertake. In recognizing ourselves in Harry, we glimpse our own potential for psychological transformation and wholeness. As we close the pages on Harry Potter's psychological journey, we're left with a profound truth that transcends the wizarding world and speaks directly to our own souls. In Harry's struggles, triumphs, and transformations, we glimpse our own potential for wholeness. The lightning bolt scar that marked Harry as different as wounded became the very channel through which his greatest strength emerged. Isn't this the essence of our own human experience? Our deepest wounds, when faced with courage rather than denial, become the sacred gateways to our most authentic selves. Like Harry, we all stand at the threshold between the ordinary world and the extraordinary potential within us. We all face our shadows, project our unresolved emotions onto others, and struggle to integrate the fragmented pieces of our psyches. And like Harry, our journey toward wholeness isn't completed in isolation, but through meaningful connection. With others, with our past, and with the deeper currents of the collective unconscious that unite us all. Perhaps this is why Harry Potter resonates so deeply across generations and cultures. Beyond the magic and adventure lies a map of the human psyche, a guide to the territory we must all traverse if we wish to become fully ourselves. In Harry's willingness to face death, we recognize our own need to surrender the ego's illusions of control. In his resurrection, we glimpse the possibility of living with greater authenticity and purpose after our old self-conceptions have died. As you close this video and return to your own life, I invite you to consider: What is the shadow you've been avoiding? What wounds might become doorways? What fragments of yourself await integration? Your own hero's journey awaits not in some distant magical realm, but in the unexplored territories of your own psyche. Remember, as Jung himself might say, the treasure you seek is hidden in the darkness you fear to enter. But you need not enter alone. If this psychological journey through Harry Potter resonated with something deep within you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What part of Harry's individuation process mirrors your own experience? Which Jungian concept illuminated the story in a new way for you? This exploration is just the beginning. If you'd like to dive deeper into the psychology of beloved stories and discover how they reflect your own inner journey, subscribe to this channel. Each week, we'll venture together into the psychological depths of another cultural touchstone, uncovering the wisdom hidden in plain sight. Hit that subscribe button now to ensure you don't miss our next psychological adventure. Your own journey of self-discovery continues with each story we explore together. From the depths of my heart to yours, thank you for accompanying me on this psychological expedition. Your willingness to look beneath the surface and explore the deeper meanings makes videos like this possible. Until our next journey together, may you walk with greater awareness of the magic that lives within your own psyche.